The first thing anyone ever noticed when they entered Mrs. Eleanor Hart's little cottage was the empty chair by the window. It wasn't particularly grand, just a wooden rocking chair with soft fading paint and a woven blanket draped across its back, but it carried a quietness that almost felt sacred. Visitors often paused, sensing the weight of memories held within that stillness, but they never asked. That, it seemed, was a story only Eleanor could tell. Every morning, she brewed 2 cups of tea. One for herself, and one for the empty chair. She would place the warm cup gently on the side table beside it, the steam curling into the golden morning light, and then she would sit across from it as though someone were there, listening, smiling, responding. And in her mind, someone was. Her husband, Samuel Hart, had been gone for 3 years. 3 winters, 3 springs, 3 long cycles of the world moving forward while she tried to keep her world from falling apart. Loving someone for 47 years does that. It tethers your life in ways that don't vanish simply because breath does. Neighbors worried about her. She was 74, living alone, with a limp from the arthritis that had settled into her bones. They offered help when she needed groceries or medicine, but Eleanor always smiled, insisting she managed well enough. She didn't confide in any of them that the real reason she refused to move or live with relatives was that leaving the cottage meant leaving the chair. And she simply was not ready for that. Across the street lived a young woman named Lila, who had moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier. She was quiet, polite, and recovering from her own storms, though nobody knew exactly what they were. She worked from home, rarely spoke to anyone except a soft greeting, and spent most evenings sitting on her porch staring at nothing in particular. One cold January afternoon, when the wind whipped sharply and the street looked nearly deserted, Lila noticed Eleanor struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags. Without thinking, she hurried across the road. "Let me help you with those," she said, reaching for a bag. Eleanor blinked, startled but grateful. "Oh, thank you, dear. I thought I could carry them myself." Apparently, my body disagreed. They laughed lightly and walked together into the warm, fragrant cottage. It was then that Lila saw the empty chair. She froze, not because it was strange, but because the chair reminded her of something deep inside her chest. A feeling she had been trying to outrun. "That's a beautiful chair," she murmured. Eleanor's eyes softened. "My Samuel made it. He used to sit there every morning. Best seat in the house for watching the sunrise." There was no tremor in her voice, no crack that betrayed grief, but the heaviness rested in the air, gentle yet undeniable. Lila nodded slowly. "My mother had a rocking chair," she said quietly, surprising even herself. "We lost her last year. I haven't been able to look at her things since." With that small confession, something shifted between them, a silent understanding, a quiet joining of 2 souls carrying different versions of the same ache. "Sit," Eleanor said softly, gesturing toward the table. "I'll make tea." From that day forward, Lila visited often. Sometimes she brought freshly baked cookies or flowers from the small market. Sometimes she brought nothing at all except herself, which Eleanor always said was more than enough. They would talk, about small things, safe things, ordinary things, and over time, about the things that hurt. One rainy afternoon in early spring, Lila arrived soaked and trembling. Eleanor wrapped her in a warm shawl and ushered her inside. "What happened, dear?" she asked gently. Lila hesitated, clutching the shawl. "I think I'm lonely," she whispered. "I moved here to start over, but I don't know how. Everything feels heavy, and I keep pretending it's fine." Eleanor reached over and held her hand. "Healing isn't meant to be done alone, love. It's far too large a task." Lila looked at the empty chair then. "Do you still talk to him?" she asked quietly. Eleanor smiled. "Every day. Love doesn't end just because someone isn't here to answer." Tears gathered in Lila's eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange comfort that washed over her listening to Eleanor speak with such simple, unwavering faith. Spring melted into summer. The days grew brighter, and so did Lila. She began sitting outside again, waving at neighbors, planting small pots of flowers, even sharing conversations that weren't hushed or forced. Eleanor noticed every change, every softening, every returning piece of the girl's spirit. Yet for all that hope, there remained a lingering heaviness around the empty chair. Lila watched how Eleanor glanced at it each morning, how she placed the second cup of tea beside it without fail. And though she respected Eleanor's rituals, she wished, quietly, that the older woman would allow herself to live beyond her grief too. One afternoon, Lila walked in carrying a wrapped package. "I brought you something," she said shyly. Eleanor laughed. "You've already given me too much." But Lila insisted, placing the gift in her hands. Inside was a small framed sketch, a drawing of Samuel sitting in the rocking chair, smiling toward Eleanor with warmth in his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it captured something real, something soft, something full of memory and love. "I drew it from the photograph on your mantel," Lila explained nervously. I thought maybe it would feel less empty. Maybe it would help." Eleanor stared at the drawing, her lips trembling. For the first time in months, tears spilled freely, slowly, beautifully. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. This is precious." She placed the frame gently on the side table beside the rocking chair. And oddly, the room felt warmer. The shadows seemed lighter. The space, less hollow. That was when Lila said something she had never dared voice. "Sometimes love still sits in the empty chair," she murmured. "We just forget to see it." Eleanor reached for her again, embracing her tightly. "You," she whispered, "have brought love back into this home." In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened. Lila began joining Eleanor for morning tea. The 2 cups became 3, their shared presence filling the house with laughter and conversation. There were days when Eleanor still looked at the chair with longing, but now she looked for the drawing too, reminding herself that memories didn't have to be lonely. One late summer evening, the neighborhood experienced a power outage. Houses went dark, streetlights flickered off, and a hush swept across the block. Lila crossed the street with a lantern and knocked on Eleanor's door. "Thought you might need some light." Eleanor chuckled. "I needed you more." They sat near the window, the lantern casting gentle shadows on the walls. As silence settled between them, Lila's voice broke softly through it. "I've been thinking," she said. "I've spent so long running from the empty spaces in my life. But you taught me that empty doesn't always mean gone. It can mean love lived here." Eleanor smiled, her wrinkles deepening like rivers of memory. "Oh, darling, the heart remembers what the world forgets." The lantern glowed near the empty chair, illuminating Samuel's gentle smile in the sketch. Lila found herself smiling back at it. When autumn arrived, crisp and golden, Eleanor's health began to falter. She brushed it off as old age, but Lila worried. She visited more often, cooked warm meals, and read to her from the books Samuel had loved. One chilly evening, Lila found Eleanor sitting in the rocking chair for the first time. She rarely ever sat there, it had always belonged to Samuel, but tonight, she looked peaceful, her hands folded gently in her lap. "You okay?" Lila asked, sitting beside her. Eleanor smiled. "I'm just remembering. Do you know, Samuel used to hum whenever he rocked in this chair. Nothing specific, just a tune he made up. I can almost hear it sometimes." Lila reached for her hand. Maybe love never stopped humming. Eleanor squeezed her fingers. Maybe not. Winter crept in. The first snowfall dusted the rooftops, and holiday lights appeared in windows across the neighborhood. Lila decorated Eleanor's home with soft garlands and candles, wanting her to feel surrounded by warmth. On the night of the first snowstorm, Lila received a call. It was late, too late for good news. She rushed across the icy street to Eleanor's house, heart pounding. Eleanor had passed peacefully in her sleep. Neighbors gathered, offering condolences. Lila stood quietly in the living room, staring at the empty chair now illuminated by the cold moonlight through the window. The second cup of tea still sat on the side table from the morning. Her grief came in slow, aching waves. But then she noticed something, the sketch. The lantern's warm glow the night she gave it to Eleanor seemed to echo inside it. The love of a lifetime captured in that simple drawing remained, unshaken, undimmed. And it felt, for a moment, like Eleanor hadn't really left. Not entirely. In the days that followed, Lila cared for the cottage as arrangements were made. She cleaned, sorted, reminisced. When the lawyer informed her that Eleanor had left the house to a distant niece, Lila understood. She hadn't expected anything else. But the niece, after meeting Lila and learning how close she and Eleanor had become, surprised her. "Aunt Ellie mentioned you in her last letter," she said softly. "She said you brought her joy. She wanted you to have something." She placed the rocking chair and the framed sketch into Lila's hands. Lila couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears blurring her vision. When she brought the chair into her own home across the street, she set it by her window, exactly the way it had been in Eleanor's cottage. She draped the same woven blanket across the back. She placed the sketch on the side table. And the next morning, for the first time since her mother passed, Lila brewed 2 cups of tea. One for herself. And one for the empty chair. But it didn't feel empty anymore. The sunlight streamed through her window, warming the blanket, illuminating the drawing, and filling the room with a glow that felt familiar, like the gentle, quiet love Eleanor had carried with her, and the kindness she had shared until her last breath. As Lila sat across from the chair, a soft peace settled inside her. She realized she wasn't drinking tea with grief anymore. She was drinking it with memory, with gratitude, with the kind of love that lingered long after goodbyes. And in that still morning light, she could almost feel Eleanor's presence, warm, tender, reassuring, sitting right there in the rocking chair. Love, she understood now, doesn't leave. Sometimes it just waits. Sometimes it rests. And sometimes, when someone kind enough chooses to notice, love sits back down in the empty chair.